Welcome to Hustle and Flow with Heather Hubbard, episode number 55. Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard, and I was a litigator, partner, and practice group leader at an AmLaw 200 firm. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your personal life. So how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you embrace your ambition without selling your soul? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Welcome back. I am your host, Heather Hubbard, and today we are talking about setting boundaries. I talk about setting boundaries all the time. I encourage people to use boundaries, and I just assume that everyone knows what that means. But I get a lot of questions about setting boundaries, and it occurred to me I didn't really know what it meant until about 6 or 7 years ago. Now I hear people talk about setting boundaries all the time, and it could be that it is more common. It could also be that, as we've discussed before, your mind focuses on what it wants. The more information you give it to look at certain things, that's what it does, and it filters out the rest. So prior to 7 years ago, when I didn't really understand what a boundary was or how you would set them, it could be that there was just as much discussion around it, but because it wasn't something I knew about, it wasn't something that necessarily interested me, it could be that my brain just filtered that information out. So I don't know if it's more common or not, but I want to make sure that everyone understands what boundaries are, because they are super important, and it's worth discussing so that you know how you could actually use boundaries at work. Of course, it's good at home and in all of your relationships as well, but we'll talk about it specifically related to how you set boundaries in your workplace. Before we get to that, though, I do have two quick announcements. The first is I have a new 4-part video training series with worksheets. It's absolutely free. And it's for those of you that feel a bit stuck in your career and you're not sure if you should just stay, if you should leave. And if you do leave, what kind of job are you looking for? Are you just going to another firm or company? Are you looking for a different role completely? Are you going from a firm to in-house? All that stuff that is weighing on your mind. If that's where you are, if you're trying to figure all of that out, I highly encourage you to go over to legalcareerclarity.com/free video series. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. But again, it's a 4-part training series where I walk through the steps that you need to be taking to start to get clear so that you can make confident decisions. And I've got some worksheets for you to complete as well. Okay, second announcement. As some of you know, I am working on a planner, a physical planner for attorneys to use in planning and achieving their personal and professional goals. We're doing a test group. It's going great. We're finishing the templates. The designer's working on it. We're working with the factory. It's all very exciting. And I have a super exciting announcement, which is we are taking pre-orders now for the group orders, the bulk orders. So that means if you are a firm, if you are a women's organization, a bar association, where you're wanting to order them for a group, and that means at least 20 or more, now is the time to order those. So when we make the order, we make it pretty early. We don't get them until later in the year. The inventory that we are purchasing is for individuals only. For groups to get them in large quantities, you have to pre-order them now. You'll have until March 15th to do so. And not only are you getting the planner, but I have a lot of really wonderful bonuses for those of you that sign up. So if you are at a firm where you think, whether it's associates or partners, you could use more productivity, efficiency, and the ability to actually reach your goals as opposed to just firefight all day long, this planner is for you. And again, there is free training depending on how many you order, whether it is a webinar with lots of folks on there that can be simulcast into conference rooms, whether it is a private webinar just for your organization, or an in-person workshop. So if you are interested in that, and I highly encourage you to send this along to the people at your firm and organizations that can make the decision to go ahead and purchase, go to heatherjoyhubbard.com/planner. Again, we'll put that in the show notes as well. Okay, lots going on, and I'm happy to have you guys checking out all of the new things. All right, let's get into the topic, boundaries. So I'm going to get a little bit vulnerable and share with you how I learned about boundaries. So the year that everything kind of came crashing down for me, I kind of shared all of that in episode 1. One of my family members ended up in rehab for addiction, and I flew out to spend a week there. It's called Family Week for those of you that do not have addiction in your family. Hopefully that's most of you, although I think it's becoming more and more common. So I go to Family Week, and they have programs where they teach the family, kind of their part. And we talk about enabling. I'm sure you've heard of this, and how you can support your loved one without really enabling that behavior. And so one of the concepts, it's a huge part of the training, is boundaries. I had never heard of boundaries. Obviously, I've heard of boundaries, but I was thinking, more property boundaries from law school. I was not aware of this concept that you need to set boundaries with other people. And so that's where I first learned about it. And let me tell you, when I was going through the training, I was like, uh-oh, I don't do this. In fact, this is a major problem for me. And I don't understand why someone did not teach me about this in kindergarten. I mean, it literally should be a very basic foundational concept that we are taught as human beings, either at home or at school. And again, I was able to go all through K through 12, college, and law school without ever being told or taught about boundaries. So I'm a huge proponent for teaching this to your kids at a very young age because it's super critical. All right. So once I learned that I needed boundaries and I was not using them, I thought, okay, I need to learn more. This is the lawyer in me, right? I'm like, well, I need more training on this. I need to learn more. And I did. So I signed up for a free teleseminar, a teleseries. I don't know what you would call it. Normally now we have these online courses, but back then that wasn't too common. It was a telecourse. So you called in and people would share. Of course, as my zipped up attorney self, I never shared. I never asked questions. I really was more in the background just listening, but I learned a lot. So it was a 6-week course and it was designed for women. But again, this is going to be relevant to everyone. And that's when I really learned even more and started testing out what it meant. So I want to share with you my understanding of boundaries. Keep in mind, I am not a counselor. I am not a psychologist. I am not trained in mental health or behavioral health. This is my understanding. These are layman's terms, but I think that might be even more helpful for you because it's how I see it and how I've been able to implement it in my own life. There are 6 different categories we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to fully explain them in this podcast, but because I'm a visual learner, it occurred to me that some of you might be as well. And so I had my graphic designer create a page for you with some cute stick figures to help you remember it so that you can print it out and keep it handy because it's kind of hard when you're first doing it. If you get that download, again, if you're on my email list, if you're an email insider, it's in your email. You've already got it. If you're not and you want a copy of this, you can just go to hustleandflowpodcast.com/55. That too will be in the show notes. In the diagram that you're going to be receiving or downloading, just keep one thing in mind. The female stick figure is you. Whether you're a man or a woman, the female stick figure is you. The male stick figure is other people. In every single situation, you are the female the male is the other person. And I did that simply because I needed something to let you know that we're trying to keep, because there's two people and you need to keep one person as you the entire time. Thought about doing colors, but if you print in grayscale, that's not going to be helpful. So in the discussion today and in the diagram, just remember you are the woman. So let's talk about what it means to not have any boundaries. That's the first row. No boundaries at all. The columns represent protective boundaries and containing boundaries. So protective boundaries are all about taking care of yourself, protecting you from others. Oftentimes when we talk about boundaries, I think that's all people think about. There's another kind that's just as important, and that's the containing boundary. The containing boundary is you containing yourself so that you don't violate others' boundaries. Yep, you might be violating other people's boundaries all day long, and that is problematic. So boundaries are for protecting yourself and for containing yourself to protect others. So with the rows, you've got no boundaries at all. Then you've got walled off, and then you've got healthy boundaries. So that's how you're going to get your 6 different types. So the first one that we're going to do, the row is no boundaries at all. So let's start with protective. Protective means that you are standing there completely unprotected. So, I kind of envision this as you're on, right? Like you're at war. And this is the person that is standing in the field without any protection whatsoever. There are no buildings. There is nowhere to hide. And you are standing there all by yourself. You are prey, right? People can see you and they're going to pounce on you because they see that you have zero protection. What that means in the real world is that you're often the victim. You find that people take advantage of you a lot. People feel comfortable being really rude to you, or perhaps too honest, right? Their words can be a bit biting. It also means that people ask you to do things all the time, and you just do them. It means that people don't respect your time, your obligations, maybe even your opinion. Basically, you're a doormat. And I think we all have the ability to fall in this role. And even though many of us are tough attorneys, right? We might be tough litigators, and people perceive us as, really being tough and strong and dishing it out. But the truth is, if those things are happening that I just discussed, you're actually not using any boundaries at all. And people subconsciously pick up on that. And those that tend to take advantage of others are drawn to you. And because you are never using any boundaries, they tend to repeat their behavior and actions because there's never any downside for them. There's only upside. And so even if they're not being intentional, even if they're not being vicious, they tend to just take advantage of you because they can. So in the diagram, it shows the woman being stabbed by the man. This is very graphic and violent, but it's an easy way to just kind of remember that if you have no boundaries, there's nothing to protect you, and you are often the victim. That means that you just let others do whatever. And even if you say something, you don't ever follow through, right? They're just empty threats. Okay. So this is where people pleasing comes in. And I think a lot of attorneys are people pleasers. So this means that you do whatever people want. So, if you're working with colleagues, partners, clients, they are in charge all the time. They can say anything to you and you act like it's, it just rolls off your sleeve that you're thick-skinned, but you might not be. And it means that people call you 24/7. They don't respect your time. They might call you on your home phone or your cell phone when you've asked them to call your business phone. They might text you when you've asked them not to do that. There's just no respect, right? And you always pick up the phone or you feel guilty for not doing it. You're always there, Johnny, on the spot. Okay. If you relate to that, just know that that means you have no boundaries from a protective standpoint. So let's talk about the containing standpoint. If you have no boundaries from a containing standpoint, that means that you are often the aggressor. That means that you don't ever look at someone else and say, well, how is this going to impact them? Or how am I disrespecting them? You don't respect their space. You don't respect their privacy. You don't respect their time. So this shows up in a lot of different ways. And if you truly go through the training, you learn about how boundaries relate to physical, emotional, and sexual. So we're not going into all of that. I'm mostly talking about emotional, but just know that this does apply to the others as well. So if you look at other people's notes or, you go through their stuff and this, probably isn't happening too much at work, although it might be. If you're doing this at home with a loved one or even a child, we're not going to get into parenting skills, but when you do not allow someone to have privacy, you are being the aggressor. You are not respecting other people's boundaries. And by the way, everyone should be entitled to boundaries. This is not my opinion. This is what I was taught, including children. If they're going to grow up to be independent adults that have the ability to know when and how to use boundaries, protective and containing, they have to be allowed to do that as a child so that they can learn what that looks like. Okay, so in the diagram, this is the woman holding the sword and she's stabbing the man. So she is not in any way respecting him. Another way that you might not have boundaries when you're dealing with other people from a containing perspective is you get in their face, right? This is when I was talking about space. We all know those people, and you might be one of them, where you get a little too close when you talk or you touch someone, right? I'll share this with you guys. I don't like people to touch me. I don't like it. And so when people, even if it's like my mother-in-law or someone else, when they touch me, right? Like they're touching my arm or they're touching my leg when they're talking to me, I'm like, oh my gosh, please stop touching me. That is a boundary violation. Another is when you hug people without permission. And part of that is just social skills. And I've learned to deal with it. People don't ask. A lot of my good friends know, and they'll be like, are you up for a hug today? But it's become this social norm that everyone just hugs. But this is why I'm sure you've seen some of the articles. They talk about children shouldn't be forced to hug people during the holidays if they don't know them or don't want to do that. So this is what containing means. It means that you are not in control all the time and you don't know what's best for everyone all the time. And if you are spewing on people, that's another way I think of it. It's kind of like sliming or spewing. If your energy is all over the place and you are not respecting how that impacts others, you are violating their boundaries. You're violating their space. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. That's what no boundaries looks like. By the way, at work, another example for that would be if, you don't plan ahead and you're constantly asking people to stay late, right? Maybe you're a partner and you just think, well, associates are associates and they're just supposed to put in their time. And so you don't care whether they have dinner plans. You don't care whether they are going out of town for the weekend. You just expect them to be on call 24/7. You're violating their boundaries. You are not practicing a healthy boundary. You are not containing. You are being an aggressor. Okay? So let's talk about what walled off looks like. And by the way, you can do all of these things. This doesn't mean that you just fit in one category all the time. I find myself in all of these boxes lots of times. We're working towards the 2 boxes at the bottom with healthy boundaries, but we're never perfect, right? So you're just always trying to move around and get yourself to where you need to be. Let's start with protective. So this means that you're trying to protect yourself, but as opposed to having no boundaries, you are completely walled off. So we have a wall and the man is standing there looking at the wall. He's trying to look at the woman, but so he's standing there, but she's got this wall and she is turned around. Right? Her back is to this wall that she has built. So he's standing there trying to talk to her And she is completely ignoring him. Now, she's doing this to protect herself, right? She is just not allowing anyone to even come close to her. What this means is you're often self-centered, you ignore others, and you don't let anyone in. So in this way, you're really just trying to keep people at a distance so they cannot hurt you. At work, this means that you don't ever really make friendships, right? And if you have friends, it's not a deep relationship. You keep people on a need-to-know basis. It also means that when, others want to stop by and chat, or when they want to give you feedback, you seem cold, right? And so in your reviews, if you're a walled-off person from a protective standpoint, you may have received feedback that, you're pretty distant. No one seems to get to know you. It could be that people say you don't seem happy, that, you're not really a team player. It could just be that you are completely walled off because you don't trust anyone. Okay. Now, again, you can go from having no boundaries, people pleasing, to being completely walled off. And I found that I used to do that all the time. I would find that in certain circumstances, I would have no boundaries, right? So the people pleasing, 100%. The walled off, that really was my way of, I didn't get too close to too many people. I just wanted to keep my head down, do my own thing, don't share a lot. So I find that I can do both depending on, again, the situation. So you may find that as well. Now, if you are walled off from a containing perspective, this is you're trying to, protect others. You still have that wall up, right? So the wall is there. The man is standing there looking at the wall. And this is probably a glass wall, right? Because you've put it there. It's not like you're on two different sides of a building. You created this wall. So the man is standing there looking at you, and you're the woman, and you're looking at him. In this instance, your back is not turned, right? So this isn't about protecting yourself. This is about protecting others. And you're looking at them, but you don't ever invite them in, right? You don't ever invite them to come through that glass wall. So you don't share too much. This is very similar to being walled off on the protective, but you don't share a lot because you're worried about how they'll handle it. Can they take it? If you think you're protecting others by not sharing information with them, you actually are using a walled off boundary because you, again, think you know best. With no boundaries and walled off boundaries, in those situations, you are trying to be in control. You think you know what's best for others, and you think you know how to control and manipulate them in a way that you tell yourself is helping them or respecting them. But the truth is, it's all about you. So again, in this situation, you are distant. You don't share, you don't invite others in. So you show up to the meetings, you show up to the room, but you're never fully present. And you're probably not being honest. You're not giving feedback. So in this situation, if you're a partner, you never really mentor. You never really give feedback because you think that you're protecting that person when the truth is you're disrespecting them by not allowing them to learn from you and have a relationship from you. It also means you're never vulnerable. So even with clients, it could be that, you don't like to admit mistakes. You're all work all the time. So that's what it means to be walled off, both from a protective and a containing perspective. And in many ways, I think that's common for lawyers, and we think it's perfectly acceptable because it's the culture. But the truth is, it leaves a lot of people feeling alienated and lonely, and, it's just not a very nice place when everyone is walled off or has no boundaries at all. So what do healthy boundaries look like? And how do we start using them? Well, in the protective category, this is where you are in a bubble. Okay? So it's not a wall, but you are also not standing there without any protection whatsoever. You are in a bubble where you get to choose what bounces off and what comes in. So that means that you are protecting your emotional and physical space with something that people cannot see, but you know it's there. And it means that you don't let anything and everything come in, right? If you have no boundaries, everything comes in. If you're walled off, nothing comes in. With healthy boundaries, with this bubble around you, you are stopping to consider, is this something that I want to allow into my personal space or not? So you're only letting in what is true and constructive. So if it's not true, if it's not helpful, if it's not constructive, you don't ever let it in. You let it bounce off and right back to that person because it's about them. It's not about you, and it's not yours to take. So you don't let it in. On the other hand, even if it hurts, even if it bites, if it is true, if it's something you need to learn from, you do let it in. You let it come on in and you try to learn from it. You try to improve. The other part of this is you let others know what's expected. You basically are telling them, here's where my bubble is. Obviously, you're not going to say it like that. You would sound like a weirdo. Here's where my bubble is. You've got to tell them what that looks like. So, for example, if a boundary for you with your clients is that they need to be calling your office phone from, I don't know, pick a time frame, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., then you need to tell them that. It could be in the engagement letter. It's better if you actually have the conversation. You let them know on the front end, you need to call my business line. So let's say an emergency then comes up, your assistant gives them your cell phone and you talk to them. Then they call you on the cell phone again or they text you. That's where it's your job to remind them what your boundary is. So you would say, as a reminder, I don't do cell or text. It's important that you use my business phone. Now, here's the deal. When you set boundaries, it does not mean that other people are going to respect them, right? So I think there's a lot of confusion around that. If you just say, here's how it's going to be, and people don't follow through, it's still your job. They're your boundaries. So that means if someone does not respect what you have said is your expectation, it's your job to continue to train them or cut off the relationship. All right. So that means if a client continues to call you at night and on your cell phone when you have asked them not to, and you have repeated it over and over again, if you continue to allow them to do that, you may think, well, I'm in my healthy boundaries because I'm telling them my expectations. But the truth is you're in the no boundaries. You're in the no boundaries because what you say, you don't follow up on. Again, it's an empty threat. So don't get confused that just telling people what you expect creates that healthy boundary. Telling people what you expect is the opposite of walled off. It means that you're letting people know, here are these expectations, and I'm going to communicate with you about it. And I'm only going to wall you off if you can't respect my boundaries, right? So you're in charge, one, of deciding what comes in and what doesn't, and two, following through on what your boundaries are. Now, I know a lot of times people talk about associates not being able to have boundaries. I do think that you need to be smart about what is expected or not within a law firm in order to excel and be promoted. But here's the thing. If you have boundaries and people don't respect them at your firm, it's up to you to leave the firm. And you might be thinking, well, that's kind of harsh. Well, here's the thing. If that truly is a boundary that you are saying, this is my boundary and people have to respect it, then if you're in a job where that's just not the culture and that's not going to happen, then it's on you to go find a job where that does work. Okay. So you can't just tell people what to do and expect that they're going to follow it and there will be no repercussions, right? So keep that in mind. But if it is a true boundary for you, if being spoken to like a child, if being disrespected and yelled at, if not having any freedom to have a life outside of work, if those are your boundaries and your firm and your supervisors violate them over and over and over again, get out. get out, get out, get out, because you know what your boundaries are and they're not being respected and they never will be. So that's what a healthy boundary looks like. All right, so let's look at the containing healthy boundary. This is how you respect other people's boundaries in a healthy way. So you're not the aggressor, but you're also not having that wall where you don't ever really share. In this instance, the man is still standing there looking at the woman and she still has the bubble, right? Because he may not have good boundaries, right? But that doesn't matter. You're still going to be respectful. And so what that looks like is when you go to talk, you also have this filter where perhaps you stop yourself and you don't let things go all the way out. This means you only share what is true and constructive. You don't lie, right? You don't lie to get your way. You don't lie to make people feel better. You don't lie to control. You're honest with others. And you only provide constructive criticism. You aren't doing something to be mean or biting or to try to make someone feel bad, but you don't withhold information either because you're worried that they will feel bad. It's up to them to then have their own healthy boundaries on what comes in and what doesn't. So you're only sharing what is true and constructive, and you ask others about their boundaries, and you respect their boundaries. You respect their space, and you respect their privacy. So, before you go giving people hugs and touching them, you might ask before you start, and I'm not talking about this from an employment perspective, but before you go looking through other people's things, you ask. Before you just start telling them they need to do things all the time at all hours of the night and day, you might ask, do you have plans tonight? How can we better prepare as a team? And with clients, you also consider that maybe you work weekends, but they don't. And so maybe you say to them, hey, I'm going to send you emails, maybe sometimes at 2 a.m. or on weekends. That doesn't mean I'm expecting an immediate response, right? So you are respecting others' boundaries just as much as you are using your own to protect you. So that's it. That's what I mean by boundaries. And that's how you go about setting them. So you just kind of have to have that grid out. It's kind of like the priority matrix that we talked about earlier when the podcast got started. This is kind of your matrix on where am I? Am I not using any boundaries? Am I completely walled off? Or am I being respectful of myself and others? So using boundaries, knowing what your boundaries are, letting others know, it can make such a big difference in your well-being and your life. In the same sense that this boundary matrix can help you also take back your day and take back your life. So I hope this has been helpful. Again, if you want that diagram, you can go to hustleandflowpodcast.com/55. Thank you so much. Have a great week, and we'll talk soon. For show notes, downloads, and other free resources, and to keep the conversation going, head on over to hustleandflowpodcast.com. See you there.